Hi, everybody. I told him to say that I was the first person to hack Kevin Mitnick, although you'll never hear him admit to it. But I did get Rob Graham to put a USB stick from it, that I gave him into his laptop. I said, can I just borrow your laptop to do my presentation here at DEF CON? Here, it's on this USB stick. And he put it in there. Wow. That's crazy. So for those of you who saw Kelly's talk right before mine, I was really excited about it. And I think one of the great points that she made is that there are kinetic consequences to security that a lot of us don't even think about or don't even know about. It used to be that online security, the information that would be compromised would either be in the military, and if you're not anywhere near there, it's not your problem. If it's banks, it's ones and zeros, you get a new credit card number, it's not a big deal. We're starting to get more excited about it now that there are, cars and the Internet of Things and the Internet of Cows and stuff like that. But there still are other consequences of leaking this sort of information. It's not just journalists, it's people every day who, don't realize that they are being tracked to a hidden domestic shelter and things like that. So, and the other thing is that this is another group of consumers that you wouldn't think about. It's broadened out to consumers, and I'm really glad that Kelly did not use the old trite comparison of, is this something your mother could use or something your mother could understand? I'm really tired of that. She's a mother, I'm a mother. My teenager, my oldest one, was really unhappy to find out that his father and I were on the internet, because we're not supposed to know about that stuff. We're the older generation, the internet is ours. And I'm like, honey, who do you think built the internet? So it was very disappointing. So I'm going to talk today, and it's going to start a little bit dry, I'm sorry about that, but I'm going to lay the groundwork in the identity and access management sphere for the problem that is another one that I don't think is being talked about enough. Now, first of all of you pretty much know that delegation generally implies that you are acting under your own identity, and the relationship is clearly understood, that you're taking actions on behalf of another identity, but the two are separate. Proxy, generally it's supposed to be, okay, you talk to me as if I were the entity that you were talking to, and I will answer on their behalf. So there's no separate identity. There's nothing clear that demonstrates that you're not really talking to whoever you say you are. Same thing with network traffic, the same thing in the legal world. A healthcare proxy, for example, if you've ever had to sign one of those or get one of those, or if you've been deputized as one, you can take the same healthcare decisions that the individual would have done for themselves if they'd been capable of doing it. And in some cases, this is done ad hoc. If you're the next of kin and there's nobody else to speak for them, that will be one case, or you may go very formal and have a written healthcare proxy signed and notarized. Although I know now from experience that if you're in the emergency room with somebody and you tell them that you're their daughter and they can't speak for themselves, the nurse is going to turn to you and say, what do you want us to do? So, they're just going to bypass any lack of, legal documentation. But they make important healthcare decisions, which can be any sort of decision, little or big, for over a very long period of time. Those of you who have not dealt with a durable power of attorney, here in Texas, there's a standard form for that. If you are deputized as a power of attorney, you can administer assets on behalf of that person who signed one. It can be specified, like you can do the finances, but you can't make real estate transactions on my behalf, that sort of thing. But if they don't cross out any rights, you are assumed to be able to do anything legal on their behalf. And that includes signing admission forms, and signing leases, and anything like that. Now, the important thing is that upon signing, in the form, it can say it can take immediate effect as soon as you sign the form, or it could take effect upon the incapacitation of that person. And that's going to be a really important point as we go along. So in the technical world, it's kind of, between proxy and delegation, it's like between everybody using the root password and everybody, using sudo, where it's very clear that you are deputized with sudo to do something under your own account. However, in the real world as well as online, it's not really clear how much of that activity is being logged. And certainly if you have a piece of paper that says that you have a durable power of attorney, nobody's logging your actions. Unless, at some point there is, legal action or accusation of fraud, and they bring in a forensic accountant to look at your records and try to figure out what it was you did. But at the time, nobody's logging anything that you do on that person's behalf. This gets really complicated when what you're doing legally on that person's behalf is in the online world, using applications. I've talked actually here at LastCon about I've been dissing RBAC for many years. It's too bad Jim Manico's not here. He agrees with me that, they're generally a bundle of entitlements, and sometimes you don't want someone to have all the entitlements that comes with it. And sometimes they're only for a certain period of time. Like Matt goes on vacation, as Matt does, and I'm going to be Matt for today. But not for that thing, because that can wait until he gets back, and I'll be in trouble if I make that decision on his behalf, because Matt's the boss. So, and we do this all the time without thinking about it. The old classic RBAC, it was a group of entitlements, and they would map to your position in the organization, in the enterprise. So if you were a director of the biscuit department, then somebody would create a role, director of biscuits, and they would come up with the entitlements that belong to that in the biscuit applications, but not anywhere else, and that sort of thing. If you needed more access, you just added more roles, like, okay, I'm now in charge of biscuits and breadsticks, so give me the breadstick role too. And then the administrators just have all the roles, because it's easier that way. Just give them everything. So what's wrong with this, at least in the enterprise, and this started breaking down in a lot of places, most particularly when I was working for the Texas Education Agency, that first they assume that you're either a customer or you're an employee. And believe me, if you're doing business with the government, you don't want to be doing business with the government. You're not a customer who came because you wanted to, you had to. So it's not the same kind of customer. The detective work is often required to figure out why somebody ended up with this particular collection of roles. Why are they, doing this? Well, one time they had to go do that one thing that needed that one entitlement that was part of the role, so we just gave them the whole role, and we figured we'd take it away later, and we forgot. So this sort of messy thing that happens in the enterprise. It doesn't reflect the different axes of governance. If you knew the system administrator, you went up and said, hey, I got some chocolate. Can you just give me this role? Okay. So there weren't, a lot of stages of, you're going to decide this part of the entitlements, you're going to legally cover us, and make the decision to cover this part of the access, and so on. And it doesn't support context switching. First of all, if you're working for more than one organization, as we had in TEA, where, they have how many districts are there now? There were 1,300. 1,249, there are fewer now than there used to be. Okay, yeah, consolidation, but some people would work for more than one district at a time. And there may be legal requirements for separation of duties. You can't just log in once and say, I'm going to do all these different things for these different organizations. You'd have to log out, log back in, work on behalf of this one, log out, log back in, and switch. And the union of entitlements is just not okay. Because there are so many legal restrictions and practical ones, technical ones in the way, that you can't just give them everything. So I've spent a lot of time trying to draw pictures of how to illustrate this, what this really means. And pretty much the way I decided is that you have an identity authority who vouches for who you are and why you should be accessing the system. But on the other side, we have an access authority who decides what you may access. And this is one of the places where federation often falls down, because classic federation just holds that there's one organization, you want to give them access to your data, there's another organization where they set up the users, and whatever they decide is okay is just fine with you. And that works in some cases, but not in others, especially, again, where there are regulatory considerations. At TEA, no matter whether the superintendents decided that their staff could access something, somebody at TEA who was responsible for the stewardship of that data had to make the final decision whether to let them have it or not, because it would be TEA on the hook if there was a breach or improper access or whatever. So yes, it's a great idea to have 1,200, 1,300 superintendents adding users or requesting to add users, because that takes a lot of weight off of the central agency, but it can't just be a pass-through granting of access. All the roles have to be checked, the entitlements have to be approved, and then finally somebody has to take the final step and be the fall guy if something goes wrong. So the identity authority, there's a lot of talk about it. How many people actually work in identity and access management? Oh God, I'll buy you drinks later. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry, because, oh man. There are so many projects, there's the FIDO Alliance, there are all sorts of projects that are trying to figure out how we create identity authorities and relying parties and all that kind of stuff. But in general, let's just say right now that it validates you as an individual. This is who you are, this is what your name is. No matter how strange your name might be, yes, you are a cow, we're going to identify you for the Internet of Cows. Yes, that is my cow. You are a doctor, you work, here or there, whatever. So the identity authority, vouches for who you are, but more to the point, it's about what you can do, because it doesn't always translate. You are this person, so what? Oh, you're a doctor. Okay, now we know kind of what set of entitlements you should be having. So it really starts with what you need to do. The function, it's got to be bounded by the scope. On whose behalf are you doing this? To what extent, at what time, with what systems, within what legal scope, and then there's the authorization that, okay, having specified all this, there's an authority that says, yes, go, you can do that. So it's an awful lot like a clue game. So, can Professor Plum go in the kitchen with a lead pipe or in the library with a rope? So you're making those decisions when you're allocating entitlements to somebody. But we missed, a really important thing. Either Professor Plum is either killing or being killed in the kitchen or in the library with a lead pipe. And as you go through applications, especially if you look in the business logic, you'll find that not everything is equal. If he's being killed in the kitchen, he cannot do it with a rope. Because that combination of entitlements is not available in the use case where he's killing and when he's doing it in the kitchen. So the combination of all of these things, as you can imagine, leads to thousands of roles, because the set of entitlements is conditional based on a whole bunch of different factors. Again, business logic is hell. And now if you really want to do all of the possible combinations for these roles, it gets even hairier. Being killed in the kitchen with an ODA. And by the way, this is the other thing that makes application security testing such a pain in the butt, as Matt will remember, because unless you tested all of those cases, you would not find the flaw around being killed in the kitchen with an ODA, unless you followed all the workflows and set it up that way. So you're associated with let's say, a given organization, and they attest that you are, associated with them in the proper way. Yes, you are a parent of a student at this school, and they approve the functions that, you're allowed to have. And on the other side, if you're a data owner, you have to approve the access by that organization. You have to decide under which conditions you're going to allow them access, and what conditions as a relying party you're going to accept. What types of attestation. You know, okay, I want you to send me a copy of their driver's license to prove that you really did check who they are, you know, or something like that. So as a relying party, you may have certain conditions that have to be met before you will grant that access. And you can be all of these things at one time: citizen, student, parent, doctor, patient. You know, these can be switched at the blink of an eye. Under HIPAA, a doctor's name is not confidential, but if the doctor's hit by a bus and suddenly becomes a patient, then that same name is confidential. So these sort of things can happen all the time. However, the functions and scope are different at any given time. So if you're the doctor who was just hit by the bus, your name alone is not going to be enough to dictate what you should have access to, you know, at any given time. Looking up information about your colleague doctor when you're a doctor may be very different from a patient who's generally not allowed to look up all the extra information about a doctor. Usually we don't have dynamic reallocations of entitlements based on context. We can't do that, it's too difficult. So this is where we have leakage, because those accesses are static. So now let's talk about consumers. It's already confusing enough for the enterprises, but what about regular people? We have anticipated needs for delegation, things we already know we need to do. For example, minor children. They have online accounts and parents are asked to approve them in some cases. I have to approve you know, my daughter's iTunes purchases because one time somebody did get a hold of her password and started just buying a whole bunch of stuff. I still don't know how they did that, but I'm sure it had something to do with, you know, she clicked on the wrong thing. Then there are unanticipated needs, and these are the things, the big picture thing that I wanted to talk about today. First of all, incapacitated adults, and let me make a note here that even if you're dealing with something like, let's say, dementia. Dementia is not a one-way street, it's not even. The course of dementia may go up and down and up and down. Somebody may be very clear-headed one day, and suddenly the next day they are not making sense when they talk. And then they're better again. So there's not something where you can say, at this point, okay, we're going to, you know, consider you incapacitated and we're going to take over. There's no easy slope. This thing comes and goes. Again, if you end up in the hospital for a month, you're in a coma, you're temporarily incapacitated, but then you're better. Taking on the role of being a delegate for somebody takes time and bureaucracy. If you don't already have that letter, if you don't have that form, it's, again, there are some ways you can bypass that if it's an emergency, but try going to Amazon and saying, yeah, my mom can't talk right now. Can I have her password? Yeah, not gonna work. Is she dead? No, she's not dead. No, she's right here. She's, you know, telling me that there is a cheeseburger on her stomach and I should do something about that. Yeah, she's on morphine. Yeah, I can't put her on right now. Can you just give it to me? No, that's not gonna work. And also convincing somebody that they're incapacitated can ruin your relationship with them. So, you know, going back to the whole thing about does this proxy take effect now or when they're incapacitated, believe me, that's not a conversation you want to have. So there are a lot of ways that IT does not keep up with this at all. So for example, I had on insurance, and they have online prescription management where I could do mail order prescriptions for my family. When my oldest turned 13, I got an email notification that now that he was 13, he needed to set up his own account and he needed to authorize me to continue to manage his prescriptions. So you need me to set up another account? Okay. So I set up another account. I used a different email address because I figured they would check, and authorized myself, and then I went back to managing the prescriptions. So that, you know, they don't have very good authentication and authorization mechanisms. Of course, I knew all the demographic data. I knew the date of birth. I mean, you know, everything they asked about, I knew about. So it was incredibly easy to do. So I didn't bother my 13-year-old. He was busy playing Sims or something. Another example is setting up an online, there's some places where you can set up yourself or somebody else as a delegate, but then to revoke that, you have to do it in writing. It's like, what? That doesn't make any sense either. So authentication mechanisms that we're using today assume a lot of things. First, they assume that you know the demographic data. And, you know, of course, once you've copied down somebody's social security number and their address and zip code, the only things you really need are the name of their first pet. It's a good thing that I knew the name of my dad's first pet. It assumes that you can actually navigate online. And again, with an aging population, as someone becomes less capacitated, for example, my mother sort of lost the whole concept of the scroll bar, which makes it really, really difficult for her to navigate anywhere. So if you're going to set up online delegation, it assumes that you are in a shape to be able to log in to do it. And if you can log in to do it, why do you need the delegation? So that's crazy. It assumes that you have physical mobility and that you have standard IDs. There are a lot of people, especially aging people, who have to stop driving. Years go by, they lose their driver's license. They can't go get another driver's license. They can't drive. So they have to go get a standard, Texas standard ID, which you have to stand in line for at the DMV. Not going to happen. When somebody is so barely mobile, they can barely make it from their bed to a chair and back again. They're not going to the DMV. So it assumes that, you can type in your driver's license or whatever. It assumes that a different email address equals a different person, which is also pretty silly. You remember all the couples who did the cutesy, Bob and Sally at AOL.com? A lot of people that still do share, those sorts of things. My husband and I were so tired of getting different email from the school. All of the moms would send me the mom email, like the mothers of the class of, 2018. Let's all get together and have drinks. Or, they'd just send it to the mom. Can you bring cookies? No, I'm traveling. Talk to my husband. He's the one who stays home. So we got so tired of this, we just created an account called Kid Movers. And, we just subscribed that to everything that had to do with both schools, middle school and high school. So we both get copies of all the emails, and it works out that way. So that's another assumption that is not warranted. Again, phone numbers only belong to one person. If somebody's asking you for a phone number and you don't realize it's for two-factor authentication, if you do the home phone number, you're going to kind of have problems. There are some systems that will use 2FA and give you, call you on your home phone and give you a number via voice to type in. But you don't always know that when you're in the middle of the registration process. So if someone asks you for a phone number, you don't always know why they're asking you. And then, of course, there's, no cleverness in the security challenge questions at all. And speaking of those, this is another thing that really bugs me. We still have systems that insist on you changing your password every 60, 90 days. And everybody knows why that is, right? Yep, mainframe. That comes from the days when it actually supposedly took 90 days to crack a password. It doesn't anymore. I get a rainbow table, I can sneeze on it and crack a password. But we still have those things. But what does not change? Your security challenge answer. That's going to stay for the life of your account. So there are some things where I would have to log into it, once a quarter. I wouldn't bother remembering the password. I'd just do a password reset because I always remembered my challenge question. So again, these are design fails that, we really need to think about. Oh, wow. That's pretty awesome. How did I do that? Yeah, don't send. All right, let's try this again. Sorry about that. Matt, what did you do? Oops. All right. All right, this is my dad. That is his old Usenet format email address from way back when. And he also wrote a really cool story called The Story of Mel. If you haven't read it, do take a look. It's still floating around the net. He wrote it in '83, I think. About his time, he wrote one of the first Fortran compilers. He worked for a corporation called Royal McBee, which was a typewriter corporation that also got into making computers. And he wrote about a colleague of his named Mel, and the elegance at that time of writing code, in very small spaces, the elegance of using all sorts of very elegant tricks to do things. So he had been technical for longer than I've been technical. He did this before I was born. So he and I hung out on Usenet together during that era. And when he got around to the 1980s or so, he kind of stopped wanting to advance. He liked the command line. He wanted to stay there. He didn't want any silly GUI. He hated Windows. He finally, years later, settled on Linux. But he just stopped at the point where he did not want to keep learning more stuff. So again, it wasn't that he wasn't technical. He just got tired of all of the stuff. Also, it was a really good thing he didn't believe in security. So when he had a stroke, I had to break into his Gmail account and reset all his banking passwords because he was the one paying the bills. My mother had no access, didn't know how to pay the bills online. So I had to just go in and take care of that. And by the way, I don't know, I wish we had more varied and diverse pictures of female hackers. Because, Angelina Jolie is very cute, but I'm not Angelina Jolie. I'm more like Mrs. Roberts. I can't type with an oven mitt, but, I can do a certain amount of other things. So anyway. So I had to take over his account because he had all of the really important things that were needed to support him and my mom. And so here are the things that you need to think about when you're taking over somebody else's account. First of all, do you use your own login with delegation if such a thing is technically possible for that particular site or that particular application? Or do you use theirs? Do you do both? Do you change their passwords when you take over their account? Or do you try to remember theirs? It's a good thing that LastPass really cleverly handles multiple user IDs and passwords for the same site. But if they are still alive and you are just helping them out, they may be really ticked off if you change their password. And you don't know if someday they're going to feel really good and sit down and say, I can't get into my system. Do you reset all the security challenge questions, or do you try to remember the name of your father's first pet? Do you use your phone for 2FA, or do you use theirs, especially if you were on the other side of the country? If you're going to set that up, yes, it's a great idea. 2FA is great. My parents did not believe in 2FA, so I set it up. Luckily, it wasn't a problem because at that point, I was pretty sure they were not going to use those anymore. But if they had tried to log in, I would have had to deal with it for them. So I effectively locked them out by setting it up to make it easier for myself. So the arguments for just using their account, first of all, a lot of organizations just aren't set up to deal with this yet. With the concept that you might legally need to do everything and have all the entitlements on their account. Doing it the formal way requires their cooperation. It requires often physical presence. So I would have to take my mom into a bank branch office and show ID and say, yes, she really does want me to take this over, don't you, Mom? Which is not going to work. Mental capacity, mobility, notaries public. Some of you may not know this, but they often have notaries public in skilled nursing facilities, because it's at that point that somebody often wants to, sign a healthcare proxy or a power of attorney or something. And so a lot of the staff just happens to be a notary in case you need it, because the patient's not going anywhere. They have to come to them. And there's an ostensible separation of duties. If I'm logging into my banking account as me and logging into my parents' banking account with one of their accounts, it's pretty clear what I'm doing at any given time. Against using their account, because if the organization is not used to this and they catch you, they will block you. In the case of, I finally got a power of attorney and had banking my banking account set up so that I could also see my parents' banking accounts, except for one account, and I don't know why that one didn't get added to my view. But for the most part, I could manage everything, but there was that one account I couldn't see, so I would often log in as my mom to see what was going on in that account and maybe transfer money. And this has been going on over years. I would, whatever checkbook I had the most access to at the time, I would write a check for their expense. If it was my mother's checkbook, that's great. If it wasn't, I would transfer some money from her account to mine to reimburse me for the check that I had to write. One time I did that, and I was doing it in 2 amounts because I wanted to keep it clear in the records that there was this expenditure for $50 and I reimbursed myself, and there was another expenditure for $380, and I just wanted to keep it all neat instead of transferring a lump sum. But they decided that was fraud, so they locked my mother's account. And I said, well, if you want to unlock it, your mother has to come into the branch with her ID and say to unlock it. I said, well, that's not going to happen. So I went back to my login and just used it to do the same thing, minus the one extra account that I didn't have access to. Again, the principal account order might resent you for having to mess around with that, and the technical confusion can result if your application has not been at all designed to take these things into account. So, example, this is my mother. This is how Google turned me into my mother. So I had 4 Gmail accounts on my laptop that I was managing, a work account for me, a private account, my dad's Gmail, my mom's Gmail. And what happened was, for my mother's account, I added an alternative address. I added my own home address as an alternate address under the Gmail account, because you can do that. So my mother's real name, Nather, to her Gmail account, and I added a secondary address, which was mine. What happened was, it turns out that anybody who was using Gmail, who sent email to me, wendy@nather.com, Google would very helpfully prepend my mother's name to that address. So, and this was pretty freaky. It's a good thing my mother was still alive at the time, otherwise I would have been really freaked out. And so anybody who was contacting me for the first time who was using a Gmail account, I joined the board of a nonprofit. They were going to send mail to all the board of directors. Mine was addressed to Marilyn Nather. Oh, that's weird. That's scary. That's freaky. Why is this a problem? Well, if you are Superman, for example, and you set up an alternate address of clark@kent.com, anybody who sends mail to clark@kent.com will get, helpfully, oh, that's Superman. That's why this is a problem. This is a potential privacy problem. So I contacted Google about it. I tried to explain it with this example and said, I think this is a privacy problem. I told Rob Graham, and he was like, well, hold off a few minutes. I want to see if I can do something with this. But, I talked to them, and they said, no, this is the way it's supposed to work. It's, functioning as designed. Okay. I'm like, so you don't mind if I talk about this? Oh, no. Okay, that's fine. But, it is a problem. Again, it's not understanding that 2 individuals may be administering the same account. Other problems to address, of course, if you're adding a delegate in an application, it doubles the attack surface. They could get pwned, you could get pwned. And how do you monitor properly for fraud? Especially if they're working under the same ID. If you've got delegation, then you have an opportunity to log separately, and you might be able to build some rules to, investigate or compare the steps taken under one account with the other one, taken by the other account. But if you're doing transfers, and that's the whole purpose of having a delegate, there's some things that they have to work out there. You have to reanalyze your business rules. How does revocation supposed to work? How do you revoke? Who do you call at Amazon to revoke, a delegate account? Who do you call at the bank to revoke a delegate account? And also, both recertification, if you're going to do that, and revocation assume that the principal is in any position to make that decision. My mother, towards the end, would get calls and somebody would be asking her stuff. She actually got warning calls from the bank saying, we've locked your account, we think there was fraud. She could not even tell me who had called her because it was in one ear and out the other. She did not understand. She thought maybe it was maybe it was a sales call. She had no idea. A minute later, she wouldn't remember what it was. So that sort of thing is another both procedural, legal, and technical problem that has to be worked out. And also, of course, it was pointed out to me when I gave this talk before that what I did probably technically kind of violated the CFAA. Yeah, well, sorry about that. So short-term recommendations, what can we do about this? First of all, get the pieces of paper from your loved ones, from your parents. And again, this is a really difficult discussion to have. What I really urge is that if you're going to get a durable power of attorney, make it take effect immediately. The person who signs it is not giving away all their rights to you. They're just allowing you to help them. And it was a lot easier when I got it with immediate effect to say, Mom, do you want me to just help you with this one thing right now? You look kind of tired. And she'd say, oh yeah, okay, thanks. And then I could do it. It was not saying, I'm going to do all of this for you from now on and you can't do any of it. Because that's, especially aging parents, that's what they bristle at. So it's really a whole lot easier just to say, so that I can help you in the future with an emergency at some point, why don't we do this now? And I did this with my husband as well. I went ahead and drew up a power of attorney and with immediate effect. And my attorney said to me, are you sure you want to do that? Because you're giving him access to everything now. And I said, well, if I trust him for then, I'm going to trust him now. And it will make things a lot easier. If I'm incapacitated tomorrow, he can step in and pay the bills. Get central management of some kind. Get it ready so that you can get into whatever you need to access. And I think, and you'll have to tell me, you have to try this and see, but I think this is the easiest way to broach it with anybody. It's just, if you were sick in the hospital right now and you needed somebody to pay your online bills, how would you do it? Who would you want to have do it? How could they do it? And just have that discussion. I think that's the least threatening way of putting it. If you think something better, let me know. Longer term, what do we need to do? Again, this is a lot along the same lines of what we need to do in terms of explaining security to nonprofit organizations or anybody whose core business is not IT. We need to be able to come up with a way that across the board, regardless of what type of application or site it is, that there's a standard way of creating these proxies or these delegation, depending on what the legal requirements are for that application. We need to be able to integrate these different worlds better. The places where you need to present a physical ID as opposed to what you can do online, those combinations. We need identity authorities, third-party trusting identity authorities for relying parties to use for different things. And again, I know some of that effort is going on now, but they also need to think of it in this context too, for legal proxies. And we need better adaptation for disabilities in general. We can't disenfranchise people just because we have accessibility for screens and things, but that assumes that you can learn and handle the standard user interface, and you just need help in one area. A lot of this, more and more, there's some things that you can only do online anymore. Or if you're trying to manage affairs for somebody who lives far away, you have to do it online. You can't just go to the bank. You can probably think of as many different ranges of disability, as I can, but we need to expand the use cases for that sort of thing. And again, it's not taking away their power to do stuff, it's allowing people legally and technologically to render assistance where it's needed for trusted parties. And then finally, I think we really need some sort of concierge, digital concierge service to help these people navigate these really complex areas between the legal and the physical, the financial, everything else that you can think of. And I've given this talk, and I've had a couple of banks come up to me and say, well, we were already giving our customers advice in some realms of IT, consumer protection, and so on. Maybe we could add this. And I think that would be a great idea. Something as simple as when somebody signs up for a bank account, you ask immediately, would you like to create a proxy account or a delegation account for somebody else to be able to log in and manage your stuff for you in an emergency? Then they might be able to set up, if you set that up ahead of time, maybe the person logging in might have to authenticate themselves again some other way, but at least hopefully that person would be able-bodied enough to be able to pass that extra authentication hurdle. But again, these are the sort of things that everybody needs to think about in their applications, especially if they're writing them for consumers. So now I've done like, a really depressing talk, and I'm sorry about that. But it is something that's very close to my heart. Since 2003, I've been managing my parents' affairs to some extent or another, going online, going offline, breaking into things for them, taking care of things until they both passed away. And this problem is only going to get worse as baby boomers age, and we can't assume that everybody who is young understands technology and everybody who's old doesn't understand technology. That's not a myth we can afford to perpetuate. So I'm asking all of you guys, as people who design and secure applications, just to include this in your use case planning. So thank you. Now let's cheer up and have a party.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Questions?
I spoke earlier on authentication and talked a little bit about the FIDO Alliance, and they are strong proponents of using biometrics. They're strong proponents of two models that they have suggested. They're doing a lot of marketing for authentication, so that I applaud. But in some respects, it is a triumph of the marketing over technology. In terms of account recovery and a lot of the issues that they could be addressing, that's just not on their list.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not on the radar.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I did have one other comment.
Yeah.
You talked about a concierge service and mentioned a conversation with banks, and maybe they could do it. And I was sitting next to Kate. I said, Kate, that's a great startup idea.
Yeah, actually somebody did say that to me too. Do you want to join a startup? I'm like, no. But yeah, absolutely. Free idea.